The last team, the System for Sensing Neural Response, Team 4, is a true interdisciplinary team between ECE and biomedical engineering. One of the strengths of the college is the close working relationship between the various disciplines. And this particular project, which the customer is Professor Ron Knepper, does in fact integrate techniques and expertise between both departments. In fact, the 4 students here, 3 of them are from ECE, and Parth Patel is from BME. So with that, I'm bringing recognized Team 4, MinSensory, System for Sensing Neural Response.
Hello everyone, welcome to ECE Day, the last presentation. We know it's been a long day, so we'll try to make this as painless as possible for everyone. We're MinSensory, we're the System for Sensing Neural Response. My name is Nima Haghighi-Mood.
I'm Duong.
I'm Kasparian.
And I'm Parth Patel.
And this is our biomedical collaborator on our project, and the rest of us are in the ECE department. So this is an overview of our... Oh, it's not. Sorry about that. All right, so this is an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to give a summary of our project, what we've been working on for the past 2 semesters. We're going to give our project goals, and we're going to talk a little bit about the significance of what we've done and how we can help various parties. We're going to talk about the requirements that we were given by our customer at the beginning of the year. Then we're going to go ahead and talk about our approach. We're going to talk about the design overview of our whole system. Go a little bit into the hardware that was involved with this, the firmware, and finally the software. And finally, we're going to assess our level of success and talk a little bit about what we were able to achieve at the end. So the project, Professor Knepper, Lou Wang, and David Freeman, who are here today, have developed the multiple input neural sensor integrated circuit, the MinSIC. This is a 16 by 16 neural probe sensor that covers an area of approximately 4 millimeters by 4 millimeters. This is provides a very high fidelity neural signal in a time multiplex fashion. There already exists multi-dimensional array neural probes, but the thing that differs with this is that the amplification is on chip. So it offers approximately 60 dB gain without any off-chip amplification, which is a huge asset towards researchers. Currently, however, there's no platform for capturing and storing this information from the system. So the project goal that we have as Team MinSensory is to design and implement an analysis interface for the MinSIC. We want to be able to allow for real-time data collection, analysis, and visualization of the data that we receive from the MinSIC. This means that we want to have an end-to-end complete user interface that's capable of visualizing the data in real time. We want to be able to review the entirety of the data post-experiment after everything's been done so the researcher can go back and look at what they've done. And finally, to highlight specific neurological characteristics that could be of interest to researchers given various parameters.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the significance of our project. Currently, there exists a few other ways of measuring neural signals in an array format. There's the Utah array, which is shown here in the bottom right, and there is a Michigan array. Now, these are only, as Nima said, these are only the probes. There's no on-chip amplification with these, which does make Lou's chip unique. There are also an increasing amount of neural sensor array platforms coming, and there, however, does not exist a suite for collecting, analyzing, and visualizing the data, which is where we come in as our group, MinSensory. So the array here actually allows for new types of research to be done, including current source density methods and local field potential mapping, which our collaborator Parth Patel is going to talk about now.
So the point of this chip is to record from multiple locations and simultaneously. And through this, we can understand the neural circuit of certain parts of the rat brain. In particular, we can understand how different cells in the hippocampus and entorhinal cortex relay signals towards each other. And with CSD analysis, when you record from these multiple sites, you can see which cells are inputting current, which cells are outputting current. These are called sinks and sources. And lastly, right now, current source density is analyzed in one dimension in space, but with these chips and circuits, you can analyze it in multi-dimensions, particularly in 2 dimensions with this chip. And on the figure to the bottom, you'll see how tissue is placed on top of the chip and used for recording.
All right, so what were our requirements at the beginning of the year? So we drafted a couple of requirements with our partners in the ECE department, our customers, to show what we would give to neural researchers as our product. So first and foremost, we have to be able to receive and digitize 2 analog channels of data coming from their chip. It's high speed and high throughput. We're sampling at about 5.12 megahertz. And we're processing about 10 megabytes of data per second. It has a very strict organization multiplex. So that means each one of the channels has 128 nodes associated with it, but it's time multiplex. So you read the node every so often and you get a different node. Or you read the channel every so often and you get a different node depending on when you read it. Our second requirement is we have to be able to process this information and perform analysis to determine frequency bands of interest to neuroscientists. So neuroscientists are going to be using our products. We have to do something that is going to be helpful to them. These neural oscillation bands, the delta band of 1 to 4 hertz, gamma band of 30 to 70 hertz, are bands that have been accepted in neuroscience as frequency bands of interest. So we want to be able to flag activity in them if we do see activity in our data. And then this has to be real-time detection because we want the neuroscientists to be able to apply some sort of stimulus to their sample and then be able to see it in relatively real time. Also, it has to be in hardware detection so we can display it through the software. Last but not least, our last requirement is we have to be able to transmit all of this data to the PC to be able to visualize it for the user and also to collect it for later analysis. We want our system to be as easy to use as possible. So we need a simple yet still a powerful system to be able to process all of this data within that time frame. And then, of course, it has to display all 256 nodes that map to the 16 by 16 grid array. And we also have 5 selectable voltage time plots that the user can select to look at any of the 5 specific nodes to see a more broader in-time view. I don't know when it's done. Good.
All right, so this is a generic look at our approach to this problem. We implemented a hardware and software solution to achieve our goal. So this considers 3 parts. First, we have a custom printed circuit board, or PCB, that handles all the incoming and outgoing data from the MINS IC to the PC. Located on this PCB, we have custom firmware that performs data management, analysis, and transmission. And finally, we have a software suite that allows for visualization of the neural data. And now we're going to go into a little bit more detail about each of the components.
So I'm going to talk about a hardware block diagram that we have here. So as you can see, highlighted in red right now, there's the 2 analog to digital converters, or ADCs, that are collecting data coming at 2.56 megasamples per second, which, as Ben said earlier, equates to 5.12 megasamples per second when it comes down to the multiplexer here. So we use a CPLD, which is a complex programmable logic device, which is similar to what you guys might know as a FPGA, except it's easier to program to. It basically has, you can see it as having on-chip flash, sort of, so you don't need an external flash device to program it and keep the memory loaded. We also have, after the CPLD phase, it multiplexes the 2 channels into the digital signal processor for data analysis. We also have to interface with SDRAM since we have so much data coming into the DSP. And then we also made space for an SD card slot on our board for future uses of the board if the customer decides to use this. And from here, the digital signal processor performs the data analysis and bandwidth reduction, so we can actually output it via USB to the PC end for visualization. So our printed circuit board is designed to meet spec and exceed the spec for uses in the case that the customer may want to improve their design or change their design in any way. It is designed to work up to 25 megahertz input based on the frequency limitation of the analog to digital converter. although there also is other limitations such as the data processing of the DSP or the SDRAM speeds. There exists two modes. You can either write to an SD card, which we didn't implement since it was not a requirement, or the real-time processing where you can output to USB. Contains analog circuitry in the form of an input buffer and difference amplifier to reduce the input noise coming from the MIN's main board, which we are interfacing with. There contains, like I said, 512 megabits of SDRAM, a simple high-speed USB interface. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with FTDI's serial IC. And then there's the two programmable ICs that we are using, the CPLD and the Blackfin DSP. And this is just a picture of our board. It is a custom board. It is not a development board that we designed. So now Nima's going to talk about firmware.
So as Michael mentioned, we use the Analog Devices Blackfin BF514. We decided to use this because we were dealing with a lot of data and we were planning on performing some frequency analysis. So some of the features that the firmware has is that it utilizes Analog Devices high-speed parallel peripheral interface along with the direct memory access controller. This allows us to pull data from the ADCs in a very seamless fashion and store it into memory in a very organized and structured way. As we mentioned before, the data is in a time multiplex fashion. Therefore, we can't just take the first 100 values that we get and process them. We have to organize them based on the nodes that they come in, since they're multiplex, and then process them over time. So this allowed for us to do that. Next, the firmware allows us to read and organize this 10 megabytes of incoming data. It allows that the data is synchronized, first of all, and allows us to correlate each node to each other. We have some mechanisms in there where if we miss a node, if we miss any data, we can fill in the gaps so there's no data integrity issues or any data corruption. We also implemented bandwidth reduction. This allows us to take this tremendous data rate and throughput that we're getting towards our system and cut it down to something that can be sent over USB and that can be visualized. Sorry. We also implemented bandwidth reduction on the Blackfin. We weren't able to implement it in real time due to some hardware constraints that we'll talk about later, or not hardware constraints, firmware constraints. But excuse me. But we'll talk about that after.
All right, so the last piece of our deliverable is the custom software suite that we wrote. We wrote it completely in Java using the Java Swing library. It accepts each frame, where a frame is an update of the UI, and we chose to refresh at 30 hertz. So each frame is coming in at roughly 1/30 seconds. And it takes all of the data for all 256 nodes. Our data format currently is we're sending 2 bytes per node. We're going to be sending 6 bits of metadata for our frequency flags, and then 10 bits of actual voltage data. So that equates to about 512 bytes of binary data every 30th of a second to update both the color map and the plots. So it displays all 256 nodes, as we'll show in the next slide, and the 5 voltage time plots. We have tested this to run for over about 5 hours without any real lag or really any negative experience from the user. So usually the experiments we estimated to run maybe in the range of an hour or so, that you would run for an hour and then save to another file. So that shouldn't really be a problem for us. And then again, we wanted to be a simple UI because we wanted people with little technical background to be able to pick this up with very little training and get up to speed very quickly and start using it to supplement the research data. But we still needed to be a fairly powerful UI to be able to process all the data at the same time. All right. And then here's just a screenshot of what it looks like. This is in real-time mode. The user experience this is in playback mode. The user experience for real-time mode is fairly similar. You'll just see that you can click that real-time button and the configuration on the bottom will change. But as you can see, the 256 color map node is right in the middle. We have a 16 by 16 grid array where the color itself corresponds to the activity, the band recognition. So depending on what band you have, what band is in your data, you get a different color flag. Whereas the intensity of the actual color corresponds to the actual voltage that you measure at that time. So We have also tinkered the grid, so if you see some activity from like 11H, you can tell that to an neuroscience scientist using the same program. They know exactly where it is. Again, the nodes, the graphs on the right, you can click anywhere on the grid, and it will push whatever the voltage time data is to that node on that side. It'll cycle circularly, or you can right-click and hold and push to a specific one of those plots. As with any good playback feature, you have the ability to start, stop, pause, seek to a certain time. So if you know that there's some neural activity you feel like looking at 0.5000, you can go right to that. Also, with the neural spikes, since they're in the kilohertz range, we had a problem displaying them, mostly because if you have a kilohertz signal and you're displaying at 30 hertz, it's almost impossible to be able to display that if it spikes for that short amount of time, because by the time it shows on the screen, it's gone. So what we implemented was, if we do get a spike flag, we actually hold that node at white for a whole second. So a researcher just skimming over this will be able to see out of the peripheral vision that a node went white, and they can rewind and look over that a little more closely to see that there was a neural spike there.
All right, so now we're going to talk about the level of success that we achieved for this project. So due to firmware and hardware constraints, we were unable to achieve true bandwidth or neural band detection. We were able to implement the neural detection, on the Blackfin, but because of optimization, we couldn't get it to work in real time. So this couldn't meet the user constraint of being able to process the data and show the user what was happening while they were playing, while they were reading the data. The optimization wasn't sufficient, and so we opted to not include that in our final product. In terms of actual success, we did accomplish a majority of the requirements, and we did provide a full suite that lets researchers use this tool for multiple different purposes. Specifically, the software that we have is fully functional to the customer's requirements. It has both read and playback mode, so we can read live data as well as playback saved data from previous recordings. The 256 node array excuse me, it's fully functional. It changes based on every node, and the time voltage plots are also fully functional. The hardware is fully capable of capturing any type of signal that the customer would give to us, and possibly more. There's analog circuitry with fast enough ADCs and all the right components that allow us to expand this project not only to neural research, but any kind of multi-node input array. The firmware is able to collect and synchronize the data, so any time multiplex signal that you would give to us, we have the framework to organize this data in a way that we can process it and potentially be able to do analysis with more optimization. We've also been able to interface with all the peripherals, the SD-RAM, the USB communication, and we have a full framework for data analysis implemented. We just have to be able to optimize our system to allow for real-time frequency analysis. But our system is fully functional in hardware at a subsystem level. So yeah, thank you. We'd like to. We'd just like to thank Professor Knepper, Lou Wang, David Friedman for their help in this project, guiding us along, letting us know exactly what they want. The ECE 464 faculty, Professor Pisano, Professor Kia, Peter, Alyssa, Professor Mavretic, Jeff, and Mike. You guys have been a great help. Couldn't get to the point we did without you. So thank you, and we'll open the floor up to questions.
How far apart are the probes?
How far apart? 200 micrometers?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
You mentioned that right now the way your system's implemented, you couldn't achieve real-time processing. Do you have ideas of how you might improve the system?
Ideas for how to improve, we definitely do. So what's happening right now is we're getting an interrupt to process data about every 500 microseconds, and the problem is our interrupt handler and the way we're sending out data right now it takes about 1.5 milliseconds to process that interrupt. So obviously we're losing interrupts in the middle. So our plan really is to optimize basically the whole data chain. So from collection to processing to sending up to USB to be able to handle basically the data flow. Another idea we tossed around is actually we have some control over when the interrupts actually happen, depending on how much data we store up before we trigger an interrupt. So another idea we played around with, but we didn't get enough time to implement, was basically lengthening that window so we'd have more time to process in between.
Yeah, speaking of the optimization, what was the reason for choosing SD RAM versus other memory? Would you have been able to achieve faster speeds or?
So initially we discussed using different types of memory. We discussed writing to just an SD card, for example, and we discussed SRAM and even dual port SRAM. We were going to go with SRAM actually for a while due to its speeds, but due to the budget of the project, it was way too expensive for us to actually put on our board with enough memory to use that. And SDRAM was the closest alternative with the highest speeds. So
also with the amount of memory we actually needed, we needed about 64 megabytes. Doing that in SDRAM would actually probably degrade the speed. SRAM would probably degrade the speed. Yeah.
What's generating your interrupts, and where's your bottleneck? Is your bottleneck in the SDRAM communication, or is it in the processing?
The DMA control, the PPI pulls data in from the ADCs, and the DMA controller pulls that data into memory. Whenever we get the data successfully in memory, we get an interrupt. So there's the problem of the bottleneck, I believe, or we think, is the time it takes to take the data and put it into SDRAM. The interrupts are the PPI is pulling data much faster than the data can be stored, and that's where the bottleneck is coming in, where we can't process fast enough.
You mentioned the software when the neural spike was detected at the bottom of the flight and held for 1 second. Would the user be able to know if a second neural spike occurred in that?
So if a second neural spike occurred in that range, they wouldn't probably cognitively be able to know, but what would happen is it would be extended. So whenever a neural spike happens, it's held white for a second after that. So I guess if you counted how many frames, you could see that there was a second spike, but probably, to your perspective, probably not. But there is the ability to play back through the data and see specifically, you can see a spike probably in the actual voltage plot. Yeah.
I may have missed something, but use a black thing for processing?
Yes.
So why choice of black first of all? And secondly, was the fixed point of floating point and so why, and what were the issues?
So we decided to use a black fin. We thought that we were dealing with a lot of data and we were going to do frequency analysis. We were going to do FFTs to determine to perform our algorithm in order to determine what frequencies were active and what were not. So we went with a DSP because it made sense to be processing this much data. We went with the black fin specifically because the TI DSPs are almost, they're all coprocessors, so we need a separate microprocessor to use. So we wanted a DSP because it's not just a DSP, but it's an entire architecture for being able to communicate with other ports and everything like that. It was a fixed point processor, which we thought about the problems that would arise when using a fixed point processor, but we thought that since our purpose for this analysis is not to show precise data. We don't want to show exactly the voltages and exactly what data we collect. We just want a relative view so the researcher, during the time of their experiment, can quickly identify whether a band is active or not. So we didn't think the precision was too much of a factor where we would have to trade off speed for floating point.
Also, in the beginning of the semester, we had a slight misunderstanding and we thought we were clocking a little slower. So we had originally chose a black fin with onboard ADCs, and then we were set on the right path, and it became a little bit easier to plug in another black fin in there instead of reworking all of the schematics to use a different microprocessor. Right.
Just a couple questions. Was this your first board?
Yeah, this is my first board.
How many layers?
4 layers.
Was it all original design, no cut paste?
Yep. Want to go to the picture?
The traditional solution for the DSP
which by the way is a great choice, is this flip the switch, double the clock. And that,
Flip the switch.
60 megahertz is not an option.
It's running at 400 megahertz, which is its maximum speed.
But the bus speed of 25 megahertz is what was your problem, correct?
No, I mean the DSP was running at 400 megahertz and we were interfacing with SDRAM at 100 megahertz.
Yeah. So the problem was that the SDRAM was clocked at a certain rate, and we couldn't transfer data faster on the SDRAM.
From the 500 microseconds to 1.5 mil or something to that effect.
Oh yeah.
If I heard correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So there was no way to clock something faster to get the 1.5 mil to come down.
Not without degrading the signal on the other side to the PC.
Oh right. So one of our main one of our main problems with the whole data issue was that we had to maintain a certain rate on the USBN. We couldn't send too much because it would overflow on the PCN, but we had to process the data fast enough so that we could send it out. So we had a kind of a mismatch on two ends where it was a little difficult to maintain both being able to store our data properly as well as send our data out with the constant rate.
This is a tremendous achievement, by the way. This is great work.
Thank you.
I'm curious about why you decided to choose USB instead of perhaps maybe 100 megabits per second Ethernet.
Well, so we went with USB because we wanted this to be something that researchers could use. I know Ethernet is pretty common, but USB is really plug and play. It's really portable. The drivers that came with the FDDI chip are universal. I believe you don't need to install them. That was one of the main reasons why we chose. I'm not sure why we didn't.
We also had another board we were supposed to support in the beginning of the semester that supported USB 2. So we decided to support USB 2 on our board for simplicity's sake. But then that got dropped, and then we didn't.
And we're also doing bandwidth reduction. There's not really the data rates that we're going at. There's no real need to increase or use a faster protocol because we're only showing 256 nodes at a refresh rate of 30 hertz. So you don't really necessarily need the higher data rates for something going.
Seemed like the reason why you needed to do the extra processing before passing it on was because you had a bottleneck at the USB port.
Yeah.
And if you got rid of that bottleneck,
Then you could, yeah, true. It's true.
We do have a demo outside, so.